it's not rocket science. Like we just have to be like, it's sensible. And so when we talk about this treasury and depleting it, it's like, yeah, welcome to budget management. Like, welcome to the world of running a business, right? You have resources. You need to deploy those resources in a means by which they then multiply the value that you've put in.
So talk me through a little bit what it's been like so far working with your colleagues, your other chief delegates. So obviously you're working with Han, Dan and Luca. So what's it like working with those, and how do you see your term panning out?
Well, I had 6 months. This Eden thing, if it's a game, you could argue I'm pretty good at the game, because the very first trial election I won. The second trial election, I was a chief delegate, but then they changed to sortition, so I didn't win per se, but I was a chief delegate. The first official election, I was a chief delegate. The second official election, I did not move forward, and I'm really glad I didn't as a chief delegate. And I selected Edgar from my room, which was a great choice. And now I'm a chief delegate again. So I've been doing this a while, and it's unique every time. The 6 months we had different chief delegates then, we did not have consensus on a lot of things. We had very differing views. It was when Dan left partway through our term. And so there was a lot of just unwillingness to stick our necks out was one of the biggest concerns. Is too many peacemakers maybe, and we weren't quite sure how aggressive we should be about, do we come up with new bylaws? Was Dan going to do it? Do we, like, what do we do? And that's fine. Like, I get it. Second set, you guys were way more aggressive. You guys were like, no, we're gonna, you did a really like strongly worded Declaration of Independence, and you really tried to push the envelope forward. You set up the circles, recognizing the need for persistent roles outside of the elected officials. Perfectly intuitive and obvious to anyone who looks at it. And now, current set of chief delegates, we have only 4. So you need 3 out of 4 to really do anything in terms of voting. And I don't think we're going to get a lot done as a group. Like, unfortunately, I just don't think we have enough alignment on where we see Eden going. And so as a group, we're not going to do a whole lot. Individually, we can still achieve things though. So that's where this is still, we still have our individual mandates. We can still do things. Are we going to push the ball forward of Eden a whole lot? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. And it doesn't mean I'm giving up. I'm just a pragmatist. Like, I see it for what it is. And so, and the idea of control what you can and accept what you can't. I'm not going to waste a bunch of time and energy and emotion on something that is probably futile. So let's redirect that energy to something that will yield fruit. So I can still do the website. I can still create this more appealing top of funnel. And that's what I'll do. And hopefully through that process, we get, if there's enough Eden members who recognize the value in that and recognize some of these holes in the org and where we're moving, then they run next election. So again, using the process, now that the iterations of voting is every 3 months, electing new delegates every 3 months, that's not a lot of time. So there's an opportunity just to present the ideas. And if it's compelling enough, like in the end, the ideas have to be good. So if the idea sucks, then you won't get buy-in and people won't move in that direction, as it should be. Like, I'm a big fan of voluntarism, and I like getting buy-in. I hate having bosses who do this because I said so. It's like, well, why? Like, I was an annoying child, super annoying, and my son is so much like I was, and I love it because I never tell my kids to do it because it's like, I was told time and time again. I'd be like, well, why? And they're, because I said so. That's the shittiest answer you could ever give to somebody. And so, and that's the way I operate now as a grown-up, right? If I have an idea, I want to get people, I want to try my hardest to convince them that, hey, this is the right way to go. We should really be doing it this way. And I'm willing to change my mind. My wife was talking to me today. She's like, you've changed your mind lots of times. You might be reluctant to change your mind and there's some friction, but I'm willing to recognize a better idea if I see it. The problem that I would have is I have a lot of ideas and I have an opinion. And I'm willing to debate. Like, I don't capitulate often on things. And so right now we need to convince the rest of the Eden community that there's a direction that's better for this org than another direction. And hopefully through that buy-in, another election takes place. And then you get the sufficient members at the top to then put and actually execute on certain initiatives. And right now, one of those initiatives is just how do you pay for Eden? And I don't know how we're going to do it this term. I think the only wild card is maybe Dan Singjoy, who might shift his view. Luca's pretty firm. He's not going anywhere. So again, I don't think he's a great consensus builder because he just has an opinion and that's the end of it. Okay, well, how does that achieve consensus? There's no middle ground here. But it is what it is. And it's not, again, I'm not trying to cast shade at Luca. He's a fine person. He gets things done. He's very practical and pragmatic. I can respect that. But in terms of like a unified thing that we can achieve as chief delegates, I don't know. It'll be a tough haul, but we'll still get things done. Bottom line, we have our individual mandates and that's still valuable.
Okay, so why did you? So many questions. Why do you think Luca then is not a good consensus builder? And the only reason I ask is because I'm aware that he wasn't a fan of the circles, but during our old delegates, new delegate call, I think he did say on that call he would fund an election circle, being pragmatic. So I wonder where does this lack of consensus building come from?
Oh, I have no idea where it comes from. It's just my observation in interacting with Luca many, many times in Telegram outside of Eden. Just generally speaking, I've never really seen Luca back down from a view. So that's typically, you need to be willing to find a middle ground and give up some space. You need to be willing to accept that maybe part of your argument is flawed. And if you can't do that, you can't achieve consensus. Consensus isn't, again, there's dictatorial consensus and it's I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the end of it. It doesn't matter how many you disagree with me. I'm right, you're wrong. That's not consensus, that's dictatorship. And consensus is about finding a middle ground. And again, egos are what they are, and we all have one. Some are stronger than others. And if you can't be willing to accept that maybe part of an argument is flawed that you might carry, then good luck, again, achieving consensus and finding middle ground. I think Luke is willing to accept the circle, quote unquote, is because he knows that someone needs to do the job. And whether it's called a circle or not, I don't think he's just whatever, fine, call it whatever you want. But I don't think he doesn't agree with the principle of the circles. If you asked him, do you agree with having these circles and having them be instantiated and having them persist from time and time again? My guess is he'd probably say, no, we don't need them. We can just have Eden members selected with their budgets, split consensus, as he calls it, and we'll get things done. That doesn't require circles in his view. I think, I mean, you can ask him after, interview him later, but that's my guess. And again, it's not that Luke is a bad human. I'm not trying to it's just an observation of disposition and how someone carries himself. And you can look at the chat. I mean, Luca very rarely will give up on an opinion. It is what it is. Like I've said it many times. I mean, I just try not to engage. Like it's just, again, control what you can and accept what you can't. And there's no point. Like it's not worth arguing. You're like, fine, man, if you believe this, then so be it. Good luck. All right, that's great. Let's move forward.
So because I said so is not your favorite phrase, and Luca is somewhat of a dictator in his decision making. So on completely unrelated questions, I wondered, does the ENF have too much influence over Eden?
Too much influence? No, I don't think they have too much influence. No, I don't think so. I've heard this. There's a few folks out there who are cautioning the idea that the ENF funds Eden, and therefore we are beholden to the ENF. And so in some respects, if we want more money, okay, well, where do you get the money from? If we've previously discussed the importance of money and power. Right now, the only funder we've had is members themselves who donated 10 and now 3 EOs to join, and the ENF. But the lion's share of that funding was all from the ENF. So if we want more money, right now, that's the hand that's feeding us. There's obviously an influence there. If for those of us who want to see Eden get more cash, then we kind of want to play nice. But at the same time, if there was unreasonable demands put forward from the ENF, I think there'd be enough of us who are strong-willed within Eden to say, no, fuck that. But right now, I don't think demands are unreasonable. So I think it's fine. Like the ENF and Eve have been perfectly sensible in their not requests, but suggestions for Eden, right? And Eve is he's very careful. He doesn't make, you should do this, or this is what you need to do. He's never said that. He's just suggested you should use your treasury, perhaps, if you want to achieve things. And, if you want the network to support you, then demonstrate that you deserve the support. That's kind of just obvious. And I don't think it's really, an overreaching of control. It's a fine line. It's again that the hand that feeds you. Do you bite the hand that feeds you? Great Nine Inch Nails song. It's a great phrase. We all know it. It's a fact. It's a reality. And so it just comes down to, what is the hand that feeding you expecting of you? And if it's too much and unrealistic and unreasonable, then it's up to you to show some backbone and turn the other way and say, no, we're gonna chart our own course, and we're not gonna be beholden and dependent to the ones that feed us, and we'll find a way to feed ourselves. And I think we have enough Eden members to be willing to do that if it seemed like that was the way to go, because it was too much overreach. But I don't think that's the case right now.
So Eve has mentioned on a couple of calls that they're very committed to topping Eden up. They believe in Eden, they believe in EOS governance, and Eve himself has said he wants to see Eden succeed. So I think everything is aligned. But I just wondered, has the ENF made it clear to you or this group of chief delegates what kind of benchmarks or KPIs they're expecting you to obtain for said top up of Treasury to occur? Because I know that people like Dan and Felix are very cautious about draining or using too much of the Treasury, because perhaps maybe they don't feel confident that the ENF will top them up, or perhaps they feel that because they don't know what the target is, they don't know what to work towards, especially with Felix, at least. I don't know about Dan, I haven't spoken to him recently. So I just wondered, has the ENF given you those KPIs, or do you have any kind of, objectives in your head that you think if we can just get there, we feel confident that yes, the ENF will then have the confidence in us to top us up?
So that question was basically asked during the day after we were elected. We met with Eve. It was a live stream, uncut, unedited video. And so, which is the best form of transparent communication. When you're willing to have a talk, not be willing to, hey, no, off the record, and then we need to chop it up because I'm going to say something. No, it was candid and to the point. And so we asked him, and he didn't. And so to his credit, right, he didn't want to just dictate and mandate what those KPIs should be, because that then, to your previous question, provides too much influence as to what Eden can be and should do, right? If you provide, as Dan mentioned, there's a book called the Tyranny of Metrics, or Tyranny of KPI, or whatever it is. And it's because then you just only solve for whatever those are, and you lose track of what can be and the potentiality of what your focus is and what your mission is. So he didn't provide explicit KPI for us to try to shoot for, but he did make it pretty clear we needed to use our treasury and we needed to try to do something of value. It's not rocket science. We just have to be it's sensible. And so when we talk about this treasury and depleting it, it's welcome to budget management. Welcome to the world of running a business, right? You have resources. You need to deploy those resources in a means by which they then multiply the value that you've put in. That's how running a business works. And I don't know how much experience Dan and Felix have in running businesses and failing at running businesses, because they're both younger guys. So maybe the failure opportunities haven't been presented enough. But that's a great way to learn of how to be deliberate with what you have. And so we're not being deliberate as Eden with what we have. We're being overly cautious, and we're being penny wise and pound foolish. And we need to or another great phrase that my dad, shit or get off the pot. It's we're sitting on all this money, so let's do something with it and demonstrate that it was valuable. So again, membership growth. This is why I keep going to it's so, to me, it seems obvious. But again, this is my ego talking now. If we can just attract more members, that demonstrates value to the network implicitly, because they're more EOS and Eden members both. And that is the biggest value we can add to EOS right now. We're not going to change the democratic system of EOS. We're not going to that's just not on the table. We're not going to create a killer DAP with $500 a month each. It's just not going to happen. What we can do is draw on a bunch more users because of the compelling system we have and the future promise that we might bring via what EOS can become and what is possible here because of this unique system that philosophically aligns with so many. That to me is so obvious and attainable. That's an attainable goal we can actually achieve. We can create a new brand, bring in new people. We can do it in the next 3 months and then say, look, network, look what we did. We're on the right track. Can you help us now with more funding? Because we can then do this even more. We can compound these efforts and then deliver more value. And it's Dancing Joy and Felix use the Fractally method to empower people to contribute, but you need to get the people first. So let's bring in more people so you can then achieve and execute on what you'd like to see happen. But that's not going to happen if we just hold all the money we have and let it trickle out slowly. We're not going to get shit done. and then we will fail and die. So so this is like the blows my mind part, that we're arguing about this, and the idea of turning off the UI is like, that's a solution. And we're going to sit on this money in the treasury and not try to use it because it's not written in the bylaws that we can. It's not written in the bylaws that we can't. So like, accept that part of the like, this is what Felix says. It needs to be in the bylaws. We need to use the process. It's got to be in the bylaws. Dude, like, there's another great phrase, beg for permission, or sorry, ask for permission or beg for forgiveness. And I'm a big fan of just begging for forgiveness, because that's action oriented. You act based on what is sensible. It's transparent. You disclose what you're doing. You back up your decisions for doing it and your rationale, and you just fucking do it. And if you do it wrong, and this is what Eve has basically said too. So what Eve did say is just do it, just act, stop talking, start doing. Changing the bylaws is just more talking. That is not doing. So like, Felix, if you're watching this, I'm sure you are, please, dude, like, we got to do, we need to like stop. The bylaws don't tell us that we can. They don't tell us that we can't. So take that and run with it. And we need to like kind of grow some balls here and just be willing to take a risk, right? It's like the first set of chief delegates. We didn't want to cross the line. No one wanted to stick their neck out too far. And so we didn't. And what do we achieve? Barely got bylaws in that we could actually like act on. We didn't do anything in terms of transitioning the account keys to Eden chief delegates, which you guys barely got done in your term. Like, we could have done all that. We knew that Dan wasn't participating in Eden from like, it was apparent well before Tuesday on February 22nd, right? We knew that because we were told this was coming. And so we had many, many months of our term to recognize that he was fucking off. And we didn't do shit with that. And that personally pisses me off. We weren't empowered to do anything with it. Dan certainly didn't help and step up and say, hey guys, guess what? Love what you're doing here. Love that this is an iteration from my book. I want you to succeed. I want this version of my ideas to succeed. So I'm going to make it really easy. And by the way, I'm not doing the bylaws. Hope that doesn't, so you should work on those yourself. You could have done this in February. By the way, I'm not going to help you with code updates anymore. This is going to be on you. So here's the keys. How can we work out the key transfer, the permission transfer, so you can be autonomous? He could have done that. He didn't do it. Well, why? I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm assuming it's somewhat self-serving. And it was probably the idea of pulling the current Eden over to the new idea Fractally. Kind of obvious to anybody looking at this. And that's kind of bullshit. Like, we should want to be like, we should step outside of ourselves and our own egos here. And what's better for the principles and what's better for humanity? Well, if Eden has value because of what it can bring as a form of a new democracy, well, let's help it to flourish. And Dan could have done that, and he didn't. And it was a decision that's really unfortunate. And I find it very frustrating. We're moving forward. We're moving beyond it, but we were set back, and it was a choice to be set back. Another choice could have been made to help push us forward, and it wasn't.
So do you think then that you guys, or this term of chief delegates, will actually ratify the bylaws that we proposed, or maybe you don't even need to ratify the bylaws? What's your views on it? Because on our original meeting, we felt confident you would ratify them. Definitely feel less confident now. So talk me through it.
Right now, the sticking point, as far as I understand it, is the line added to the mission about ensuring the continuity of the Eden organization. Okay, so and this is basically Luca. He doesn't like the word ensure. What does that mean? He asked for clarification, and it's fucking written in English, dude. And I get it. We don't all speak English as a first language, but dictionaries are plentiful. And ensure has a very clear, deliberate meaning, and it means to not leave it to chance. So he has a problem with that now, because what does that mean to ensure? So maybe we don't ratify the bylaws as is because of that. I don't know what Dan's view is. I think Dan's maybe more open to that. Han and I seem to be pretty much aligned on where we see this, because Han and I have a very similar view in terms of the governance aspect. And that's kind of what we're pushing towards, is what this can be as a governance tool. And that's not what Luca sees us as, which is fine. I'm not sure what Dan sees us as. I think I don't know exactly. He's somewhere in the middle. So I'm not sure. I don't know. That's the biggest, and the way the bylaws are, you have to accept all or none. And so, yeah, the 15% to 5 to 50% change is written. In fact, so the previous set of bylaws mentioned nothing about funding disbursements. So there's absolutely nothing written in the rules that say thou shalt only distribute the budget at 5% a month into perpetuity. It doesn't say that at all. So we could, without even ratifying these bylaws, change it to 50% a month if we felt like it. Some would say that's socially irresponsible and you shouldn't, as CDs, be able to just touch the treasury like that. Okay, fine. But you could anyway. It's not against the rules. So we're not breaking any rule. We're maybe breaking a social trust And that's the thing with Eden. Accountability comes from reputation and the social trust you have within the community, and how you then perform in the next election based on that social trust, good or bad. So yeah, to answer your question, I don't know. We've got our meeting on Monday. It's on the agenda, and we will talk about whether we're happy with that and if we can get around what ensuring continuity means. To me, that means that we can't leave running this election and running the software up to chance. And so that means, in my view, you shouldn't be leaving it to, we hope that a Pomelo pitch will draw enough money. First of all, we hope that Pomelo will accept a pitch to pay for the infrastructure that is to run Eden. We don't know I don't think it's a public good. Eden, we're a club. We're an exclusionary community by design. Not everybody is an Eden member if they choose to be. They've got to
will approve a Eden proposal. I don't think, anyway.
Some would say, well, then Dan's argument, Dan St. Joy, is that Eden is a public good because it's fractal democracy, and that's good for the world. This is fine, but that's different. You're talking about a philosophical idea, and I'm talking about the cost to run this organization. That is not the same thing. So anyway, that's leaving it to chance. If we leave it to Pomelo, or we leave it to the question of how we get funding, right? You brought that up. Well, the ENF, we don't know if we're going to get more funding. We don't know. What are we going to beg other potential donors in the community? That's all ad hoc. That's all random. We don't know. What we can do, we can be quite deliberate to ensure the continuity, is to say, from the Treasury, we will draw X amount of dollars per month to pay for the infrastructure costs that are there. That could be something that's deliberate. That's ensuring continuity right there, explicitly. We don't agree on doing that. So if you accept the bylaws, but you aren't willing to do that, then you're kind of not doing what they say, which is fine anyway. Like, in the end, you could accept the bylaws. They could say, thou shalt brush your teeth twice on a Saturday and not on Sunday. And it doesn't mean you have to. I mean, whatever. You know what I mean? So you could accept the bylaws as is and just not really care about that little wording of ensure continuity.
So, the reason why we put that word in there was just basically so the Eden election would always be prioritized. So if you didn't want to use the circles, you didn't want to use your funds in any kind of pooled way, you then had to figure out a way to host the election. So if all the Eden chief delegates were developers and electioneers, they could do it themselves at no cost, then that's fine, because they've ensured the continuity of Eden. It's not about ensuring the continuity of the circles. It's just making sure that by whatever means necessary, there is an election and that election is held on time. That's where we were coming from it. But of course, these things are open to interpretation. So this is always a big sticking block, and I don't really understand why, because it was never really proposed this way. But I'm going to ask you the question anyway. Do you think the Eden Treasury should somehow force CD disbursements to be sent or spent in a particular way that's non-voluntary? As in, say, we've upped it to 15%, but 5% automatically goes to an election circle, just randomly, just for sake of argument. Do you think that the Eden process should force that financial transaction, or it should always remain voluntary?
I think that when you run in an Eden election, you're running on a particular pitch, and that pitch usually involves how you're going to spend funds if you are elected. So we're creating verbal contracts, social contracts with our peers based on what we say we're going to do. So but you don't know if you become a chief delegate. You don't know if you'll be a level 1 delegate. So in advance of the first election, I put out a little set of questions that people should consider asking each other in their room. And of those questions, one was, what do you do with your funds if you become a level 1 delegate? And then what do you do with your funds? This is from the first round questions you could ask. And then what do you do if you become an actual chief delegate? You should have different answers to both of those, and they should be on camera. The whole point of this accountability, is you record these discussions. They end up on IPFS. You can review the videos and what people said they do for time and eternity. And then you can hold people accountable to what they said they do versus what they actually did. And so and people change. I certainly, my shift changed in that first election because I was unemployed in that first election. And then I became employed by Helios. So, okay, I don't have the time I thought I had. And I'm sorry, community, I just don't. And so I didn't do everything I said I was going to do. And that's okay. It's up to the community to decide if it's okay or not. However, are you transparent with what changed and what did you do with your funds? And that's up to the community to then measure you and decide if they want to trust you in future elections. That's how it's supposed to work. So yes, there's always going to be shifts. But to now say, you're going to say you're going to do this, you say you're going to do that, you get to being a chief delegate, and it's like, oh, we got to pay for an election. How are we going to do that? Like this, we got an election coming up. There's some code changes because the bylaw change required some code change. That's a cost. I didn't have any of that planned in my pitch because it didn't didn't plan for. Maybe now you do. Maybe that's just it. I'm going to run on explicitly any money I get, I'm going to put towards running the election. Okay, is that enough? Are you going to have enough? Do you need 2 chief delegates to pull that off? Do you need 3? Like, how much funding is that? At the rate currently, you would need all of chief delegate funding just to do this. So everyone would become a chief delegate and all your money would go to do that. And you would do nothing else that you said you'd do. Is that scalable? Is that really what we want to try to do? So I don't think personally that you should be imposing costs onto delegates who receive their funding. Let's empower delegates to use their funding in a way that they said they would, because that achieved consensus and is likely best for the community as a whole and EOS as a whole, because that's kind of what we're about, right? So the way you can achieve that is by creating another bucket, which is funded from the Treasury directly. So all Eden members are paying an equal pro rata share because we're all members. It comes of our communal. It's like any government. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is how they do it. This is using public goods. Public funding comes from, we pay our taxes into a pot. Yeah, they print money out of thin air, which didn't get paid for by taxes. That aside, there's funding that goes into a bucket and it pays for services that all citizens leverage and utilize. This is no different of a proposal. You take public funding, you put it into a pot, and it pays for services that all members leverage and utilize, which is the election process and the election UI. It's obvious. You don't have a communal pot of money, have individuals receive part of that, and then say, now you need to use your individual disbursements. Hopefully you can align on how much. Hopefully it's fair. Hopefully it's equal. Hopefully you can arrive on what that number is, and then use that to pay for things we all leverage. That's a nightmare. Like, it's obviously a nightmare. Like, I don't understand. I've asked over and over again, explain to me how this works. I've got no good answer other than we'll figure it out. We'll come together in the last minute. One of them was like, we have a Pomelo pitch. And then the question is, well, how do you know how much funding that Pomelo pitch raises to cover these costs? And the one solution was we just wait until the last week of Pomelo, and then we add whatever's needed necessary to get it across the line. Well, that's a great fucking idea. Like, that's great. So everyone's got to pay attention now. You got to have enough money saved up that you didn't previously earmark. And it's like, that's the definition of ad hoc random. That is not ensuring anything. And it blows my brains. Like, I just can't understand that that's like a legitimate, thoughtful answer that someone's put forward. It's like, there's such an easier way to do this. Just use the treasury we have, pull it out, give the CDs control over that money. So it's not just random. It's not just going to some incumbent, like a circle doesn't get the money directly. And then they can inflate their prices and steal from the community, essentially. No, you trust the chief delegates who you've elected, that you trust, to then ensure that the money is going, and that there's fiscal responsibility, that there's an open and transparent procurement process. You guys in an RFP, request for proposals, you do that and everyone sees it. And if they, hey, no, that's way too expensive. Okay, well, can you do it cheaper? No. Can you do it cheaper? Oh, yeah, I can do it cheaper. Great. Tell us your qualifications. Like, we can change out the leads of the circles. That's the point. It's about the role that persists, not the soul. Like the Haifa Dow guy, like Reiki, great guy. He's great at like holding space and like curating conversation of a community establishing itself. And that's one of the great lines that he uses. It's about the role, not the soul, meaning it's not a human that's important for a role to function. The role is itself. And we hope that the right humans fulfill that role, but they can come and go. Humans can come and go, but the role must persist. And so that's what the chief delegates are here for. We ensure that the right person is fulfilling that role. We ensure that the money makes sense and they're not gouging. And that's our job. And to me, then that's, again, the bucket. The chief delegates control that bucket and then pay these service providers. It seems obvious. It seems that I'm waiting for a better answer. So, I mean, I'm open to have my mind changed. So far, I've not heard a compelling alternative to how we can achieve this. And we're stuck there.
So I guess what you are proposing is a form of forcing the money to go there for the ensuring the continuity of Eden, right? Because then the delegates get to decide how it's spent, but it's decided on a consensus mechanism, right? So 3 out of 4 would have to vote for it to be spent in whatever way. So you could have a situation where one delegate is unhappy, but it doesn't really matter because consensus has been made. That's what you're...
Or if you had 2 versus 2, then none of that money moves from the bucket into a service provider. And then the whatever that service provider's role was doesn't get done. That's a possibility, but...
But how do you know for certain that the idea of having it just fully voluntarily will not work? So let's say let's say the disbursement comes at 15%, everyone gets 3 times more than they were planning on getting. Why don't you guys try? You could see if this is going to work. So you've got your election circle, you calculate how much it's going to cost, and you say to the CDs, we need to pay this much. Let's put our contribution in first. And then, we demonstrated to the delegates, the level 1 delegates, of our kind of responsibility, and just see if they do it, because we might be trying to solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved.
I think that's what we're going to end up doing. So yeah, that's what's going to happen. Do I think it's the most efficient way to do this? No, that is my point. So maybe I'm just thinking too far ahead here. That will work. Is that a sustainable means to try to do this? I do not think it is, because then it restricts the ability for individual delegates and chief delegates to do what they said they do during the election with the funding that they have. So now if they don't have access to the funding they had because we need to pay for the next election, or because we need to pay for code upgrades or a bug, then they don't get done what they were supposed to do. So that's, like, to me, worse. That's a worse outcome. It'll work. I think we'll get through this next election just exactly as you put forward. No bucket. Everyone just comes together and we all hold hands and we pay for everything as needed, and that's great. I don't think that's scalable. I don't think that's how we want to do this every single time. It requires too much oversight. It requires too much coordination, and that becomes tiring. So I think there's a risk there, and it's not deliberate. I like deliberate things because you just know it ensures things. You know things are going to get done. Again, running power plants, it's all about being deliberate. You don't leave things up to chance. You don't hope we can come together and work it out and make it happen. Because what happens if we don't? Well, I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a risk. So normally when you foresee a risk, you try to mitigate against that risk. Again, power plant running. You wear PPE, personal protective equipment. You make sure you use a proper lockout, tagout, so there's no active energy to blow your arms off, because people do sometimes. They don't follow the rules and they die. So, like, that's my view. I mean, it's extreme, but that's what happens. So if we recognize there's a risk of doing this willy-nilly, let's all come together, how do we avoid that risk? Well, the bucket thing is one way. So, but we don't have to. Again, this is where I'm going to stop pushing on this. It's pushing on a rope at this rate. So just going to, like, to your point, we can get through the next election likely without having anything set up. So, okay, great. Let's just do it that way. I'm going to stop banging on this drum. Like, I'm persistent and maybe stubborn, but I recognize, again, I'm not going to push on a rope forever. It's a waste of energy. So I'm going to direct my energy somewhere else. And maybe we'll see, we'll let it play out, and people can come to their own realization. Oh yeah, this is kind of shitty. This is a bit too random. This is a bit too ad hoc. Maybe we should do that. And that's fine. So let's just let it play out, and we'll see. Maybe we don't get there. Maybe we all just coordinate exceptionally well, and we all come together last minute, don't spend our chief delegate funding and delegate funding until the last minute, because we need to save it, right? Because we need to see if we get enough money in Pomelo, and the way the Pomelo seasons line up with our elections to be the end of a Pomelo season lining up with the next election. And assuming that the Pomelo team also, because again, this seems to be the biggest shining light, is using Pomelo. We hope that they do their forensic analysis and the funds are distributed on time and we can pay for these service providers. And if we can't, then who takes that risk? Well, the service provider. Is the service provider down with taking this type of risk over and over and over again, doing work and hoping they get paid later? That's kind of shitty. Like, so it takes a special service provider. Maybe we have those who are willing to do that work pro bono and hope they get paid later. But it's not, to me, a great way to run an organization, which begs the question, are we even an organization? Some people are like, they don't like my view of trying to ram this organizational structure down everyone's throat. It's no, we are a bunch of people who are organized. We are by definition an organization. If you have a preconceived notion of what an organization is with a hierarchical structure and people who bureaucracy and red tape and siphon all the money for themselves, okay, fine. That's your view of what it is. It doesn't have to be that. But an organization, we organize for election. We are exactly an organization. So then we have to ask ourselves, are there things that we all share as members of the organization, public services that we use? Yes, the election, the website, the code. It's kind of it, right? Maybe the website, like I put forward the idea that the website that you're going to make that isn't tied to the voting portal, it's two separate websites. Maybe that's not something that the organization cares about. I think it should be. I think our public, again, this idea of like, how are we going to draw in more people? It starts there. So we should have a focus on that as a community. We should want this public facing image to be as effective and deliberate as possible. So it persists. Like, there's costs with having a website. It's minimal. So I think we can handle that. But anyway.
Well, it's really interesting because I think it comes down to this, right? This is the two tribes. It's efficiency, effectiveness, pragmatism versus independence, freedom, and non-control. And I find it really fascinating because you and Luca are arguably at loggerheads, but actually, I still deep down think you're fundamentally aligned because you're in Eden. So fundamentally, you want the same things, but you differ over the pragmatism of efficiency and the fear of too much control and the lack of independence. And I just feel like that is an area that the compromise can be reached. I really do think it can be, because I think there's more that unites you guys and all of us than divides us. I hope we don't go the way of traditional politics and humans, become tribes.
It's forced compromise. And the compromising is me. Like I'm going to stop pushing on this idea. That's the compromise. It's right. And Luca joining Eden, he wasn't one of the first people to sign up. There's plenty of chat, Luca shitting on Eden. It's there. And he came later, and he sees it as a WPS system to fund Pomelo. That's how he sees Eden. He doesn't see Eden as a process to have governance and influence over the EOS blockchain. So yeah, we're both Eden members, but I go right back to that fundamental problem we have now is we have people within Eden who have very differing views of what Eden is and what it should be. And because of the cultural difference that we have, it makes achieving consensus that much more difficult. So yeah, we don't agree actually on what Eden is. Very minimally do we agree on what it is, which is fine, right? We don't have to agree, and we'll still move forward, and it is what it is, right? And so that's the idea of consensus 2/3 + 1. You don't need 100% buy-in. You just need a supermajority buy-in. So now it's just a question of who else within Eden, looking at the different manifestations of what Eden can be, what do they think? And if we have more people who view one way versus another, then that will manifest itself into a nice randomized distribution of that view, and it boils itself up to hopefully a cohesive set of chief delegates that can move forward with that unified view. Right now, we don't really have that. And that's part of the whole brainstorming of creating, like, what is our value proposition? What are we doing? And right now, that doesn't exist in everyone's mind's eye because we haven't really done a good job as a community to dial in on what that is. We just have these kind of individual, unique views, and we haven't gone through the effort to try to consolidate those views, which is what we're doing right now. So we had the first meeting last Tuesday. I think we'll do another one this Tuesday, and we'll try to figure that out. And if enough Eden members can align with what that view is, then that will help us achieve consensus in the future, because at least maybe we'll have a more unified vision and curate the culture of the community around that vision.
So are you starting this kind of discussion from the premise that Eden is a DAO? Is it a DAO of EOS's DAO, a DAO of DAOs as Dan describes it, or is it a DAC, a decentralized autonomous community? Where's your starting premise for this? What is Eden in its purest sense?
It's not, to be honest, it's not even, doesn't matter what I think on that one. It's about the brainstorming session is people just, so far it's been just jot down what you think. And so we each are totally entitled to and should have our own views on that more philosophical question. And so, yeah, there is no starting point in that view. It's not again, this idea of coming to what Eden should be. I don't want to just ram my ideas down people's throats and then have them parrot it out. It should be just, here's my view. I will speak it. I will type it. Here's other views from people who are willing to speak it and type it. And then you have your own manifestation of how that all blends together in your brain, and then have that come out in the brainstorming session. The downside is we're not getting everyone's views. We only had, like I say, 18 people or so show up last time. Those are some of the hardcores, right? So we're not getting everyone's view. Hopefully it's enough of a distribution of ideas that will then have everyone's viewpoint, but maybe not. Maybe we're only selecting for the people who feel a certain way and willing to show up on a group call like that. And that's by definition somewhat siloed in a particular view and a particular personality disposition. So it's not great, but what other option do we have? If you're not willing to show up and voice your opinion, then maybe that means it's also the idea of, does everyone need to show up during an election? We've argued with that internally. The one view is, yes, you should show up. This is the only reason you're here, is to have an election. So you should show up. The other view is, if you don't show up, that means you're probably satisfied with the outcome. So you don't need to be there. So, or you just absolutely aren't paying attention whatsoever, and you could give a shit. There's a bit of that, surely. Of the 440 members we have, we had 70 at the last election that actually participated. We had 86 that actually signed up. So 16 people either didn't vote in the first round because of technical errors or just didn't show up for whatever reason. And some of the good reasons, life happens. But even still, and that's actually pretty good. You figure the signups only occurred within the last week because of the way the code change happened to update the election schedule. That 86 people were all paying enough attention to manually go in and opt in. So that's actually not terrible, but it's not great if you consider the overall population of 440 people. So, and I don't blame them, because what is Eden? So again, we've got people who joined Eden for what reason? We don't, like, I'm not sure, right? This is the idea of doing this exercise. Why are you here? What do you think Eden can become? And we're not hearing from everybody. We need to re-engage the community. We need to provide incentives for people want to participate. And we need to provide incentives for people to want to join to participate. And we don't have any of that yet. So again, that's kind of the point as I see it right now. Let's figure that out.
So I guess history is determined by those who show up, right? So if you show up, you get to determine it. So that's fair enough. What would you then, on a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate the previous set of chief delegates? How do you think their term turned out?
Scale of 1 to 10, solid 7, I'd say, solid 7. The only criticism really that I have was, because I took all the notes, so I was your secretary and took notes for you guys. There was a field called action. I said this before, but the field called action items was left blank, I think, too often. And so that was the only real criticism that I had for your group is I didn't have anything I could put there consistently. Like, what are you going to do as a group between this meeting and the next meeting? And ideally, those actions are very deliberate and pointed, and they're not. And yeah, so that was about it. But you guys did a ton. But that being said, you did do your Declaration of Independence. You did get the permissions transferred. You maybe could have done that communication earlier. I think there was an assumption that the faculty team were paying attention. And as we saw, and I mentioned earlier, there wasn't a voluntary willingness to transfer things and make that easy. That was kind of just not happening, and it certainly could have. And that, I think that's shitty, but regardless. So that came a little late, and that would have made your lives easier, but you got it done. You started the circles, which I think is valuable and important. You got that done. So yeah, and you were very good about your meetings. I liked the fact that you guys had a very deliberate and pointed meeting, and they were under an hour, much more digestible. Certainly from a note taker, it made it a lot easier. So I think 7 out of 10. That's a good score. Previous CDs, worst score. I think we maybe a 5 or a 6 out of 10. We did not make nearly as good of use. We had a lot of reasons why we didn't have a better score. So it's not to say that it wasn't just because we sucked. I think there was a lot of external influence that made it difficult to be an effective set of chief delegates. And so that's fine. I mean, but I think we didn't do nearly as much as we could have. And hopefully this next set we do better. And it depends also, like, what's that score predicated on? Like, is it predicated on what you did in your individual projects? Is it predicated on what you did as a collective for Eden as a community? That's kind of what I'm measuring this on, by the way. Like, I'm thinking of that score as like towards Eden, not individually what did everyone do, because that's more of an individual score anyway. So yeah.
Yep, it's predicated on what you want. It's your opinion, but I did kind of mean like the group. What impact they had on Eden, not individually. That would just be embarrassing, because obviously I was the greatest. So it would just
10 out of 10.
I was just kidding. Okay, so you mentioned just now, which was quite interesting, that you were doing the notes and the secretarial work, which was so vital. So we really appreciate that. Thank you. And you said this time around that you were going to act as kind of like a project manager. During your second video, I think you said, I want to be a project manager. I want to make sure the actions are noted at the end of each meeting. And I'm going to make sure that their things are progressed week on week. So just tell us, how is that going? And are you progressing on project week on week?
It's going okay, I guess. We are having meetings week to week outside of just those meetings. And a lot of it's just around the circles. So it's working with yourself, and it's working with Dominic, and working with Edgar to ensure that these infrastructure community pieces are happening. And so that's more what I meant. Like, it's more about the stuff that Eden needs to happen. Who makes sure that, and it's not, I don't make sure, I just write it down so we have something to follow. So on one hand, I need to do that. So this is the challenge I'm now recognizing I'm in. Our meetings are too long for me to want to watch. I'm in the meeting, and then I got to go through it again and make notes for the meeting. And I found the last meeting a bit frustrating. And I don't know if anyone who watched, you might have noticed in my face, I was a little frustrated with the cadence and then just the discussion. So to now have to watch it again to make notes, I'll try to do it tonight and get it done. I will do it tonight and get it done. But so yeah, I will try to still maintain that commitment of, and I think what I might just do is take notes during the meeting and just, and not try to do it like I've been doing in terms of like not word by word, but like each individual says a comment, I try to summarize it and I just go through the conversation. I don't think I'll do that. It's just not going to happen. But anyway, bottom line, I think that is still my intention. I'm going to stick through with that and try to have every meeting come out with action items that are specifically focused around what we can do and are doing for Eden. And so that's the extent of sort of what I meant by project manage. And I still think I'll be able to achieve that and try to hold us accountable. And it's not even me holding accountable. It's just putting it on paper. People voluntarily, the chief delegates involuntarily choose to say, I will do this over the next week. Okay, great. And then you'll be called on the next week. Did you do it? Maybe you didn't, and that's fine. Hopefully you have a reason for that. And then we just rinse and repeat and hopefully just get more done. Less talk, more do is sort of what we want to try to achieve.